Today is December 15th, 2020, which means, well, it's finally time for the conclusion of Legends of Garaaga. Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? Yes, I've been absent for a while, but that's going to end in 7 days. For those of you that are longtime listeners, you'll remember the tradition of Fiendmas, where I give you a marathon of episodes of newly released work. Well, it's time for Fiendmas again. On December 22nd, a mini marathon of the first 4 episodes of Derelict Trident, Book 4 in the Derelict Saga, will hit your feeds and that old YouTube thingy. Every day until Fiendmas, December 25th, you'll get 15 to 20 minutes of new content. My way of saying thank you for your patience and that I know everyone wants something shiny and new to celebrate the holidays. So, load your flechette rifle, charge that suit, make sure you have your mag boots on, and we'll meet at Neptune on the 22nd. Alas, we have to finish our travels through the library first. Again, my apologies for the tardiness. I know that's getting old, but I'm ready for 2021. I hope you are too. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 19, the conclusion of Scrolls and Legends of Garaaga.
Sitting at his table, Herodo's vision wavered. He sat up as straight as he could. The pain in his chest had lessened, but each breath made his body ache. Akakios lit the braziers and placed the torch in a holder. With Herodo seated, the older man placed a fresh scroll in the stretcher, ensured Herodo's ink reservoir was filled, and dropped a fresh stylus next to it. "You know what I want." Herodo looked into Akakios' flushed face. Why? Why are you doing this?" Akakios smiled. "It has called to me ever since I found the tablet. The last tablet. The symbol." I couldn't make out Triani's words as well as you managed, but I could tell what it meant. And the mark... Akakios' voice drifted off. He sighed in pleasure. "The mark spoke to me. It still does." "But you don't believe in the gods. Akakios, what?" "Garaaga isn't a god, child. Not as we understand them. Garaaga is real," he hissed. "Even you realized that." Herodo shook his head. "Why? Why worship something that destroys, that ruins?" Akakios laughed. "That is my business, child. Now write!" He pounded his fist on the table, making Herodo flinch. Herodo reached out with his good hand and picked up the stylus. The smell of burning wood was stronger now. Through the stairwell, he heard the shouts of frightened men. He thought he heard Cleotus's commanding voice among them. He closed his eyes and tried to ignore the pain in his body. Rune to Sanskrit to Greek. The pages of the book flashed in his mind. When he opened his eyes, his right hand had already begun touching the reed to the papyrus. Akakios walked around the table and stood behind him. His breath was hot against Herodo's neck. A scream from downstairs caused both of them to look toward the stairwell. The stench of burning wood and plaster was palpable. "What have they done?" "Keep writing, boy. Ignore the fools." "Heed Garaaga's call," Herodo wrote. "Obey its commands. Choose your bargain and be blessed forever." The reed felt hot in his hands. The words seemed to burn rather than soak into the papyrus. "You wear the symbol?" Herodo said. Akakios chuckled. "On my flesh." "You never bathe in public. I've never even seen you shirtless." "I haven't been nude in public since I discovered the mark and had it carved into my skin." Herodo put down the reed and turned his head to Akakios's. "Why? Why me? Why didn't you choose another scribe?" Akakios' grin widened. "Orphan, Jew, outcast, you were perfect, Herodo. Someone I could raise myself. Someone who would trust me without question." Akakios placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And someone who would join me." The fingers tightened, and Herodo moaned. "Or would have." The fingers wrenched and then released. "Write, boy." The scribe picked up the reed and drew more letters on the paper. He coughed, and a spatter of blood appeared on the papyrus. I've been trying to sneak into the library for days, child, and track your progress, but you notice the grate every time. I wanted to know the moment you finished the last tablet. You were the one? Why? Kakio smiled. So I could steal the scrolls from the bin before they were cataloged. But no one else would have even bothered to look at them. Cleotus would have, and Cleotus knows more than he should, especially about the symbol. The symbol? Garaaga's symbol? The symbol is the key. It opens the way. The way? Right. I'm not going to tell you again. The cool surface of the marble roller tapped against Herodo's ear. Right. More Greek spread from his reed. Akakios twisted the scroll in for Herodo, giving him fresh papyrus. Choose your bargain. Bargain? What bargain would you make? Knowledge, child. What else is there to have? Akakios tapped the roller on Herodo's shoulder. The blow made him wince. Right! The older man yelled. The scribe scratched more symbols onto the papyrus. He coughed again and wiped blood from his lips. The smell of smoke was stronger. Akakios was whispering the words as Herodo wrote. A sacrifice opens the way. The symbol opens the way. Herodo dropped his hand from the scroll and to the table's surface. What are you doing? Akakios hissed. Herodo turned and looked up at his patron. No more. Akakios took a step back and slapped the roller in his palm. Right, or I will kill you. The scribe smiled. You will kill me regardless. There are different ways of dying, boy. Herodo nodded. Profanation, he whispered, and dropped his eyes to the stylus. What? The scribe punched the stylus into Akakios' face. The rigid reed's sharpened point drove through the man's eye socket with a wet plop. Blood jetted as Akakios screamed. The patron's hands flew to his face, the marble roller banging to the floor. Herodo moved away from the table. He reached down for the roller and moaned. The sharp pain in his chest intensified, and blood dribbled from his lips. His fingers managed to grasp the heavy cylinder. Akakios stumbled backwards, his shouts of pain echoing in the empty hall. Herodo limped toward the bloodied man, his right hand held high. He smashed the roller into Akakios' temple. The older man's skull crunched. Akakios fell against the wall, his flailing hands knocking into the brazier. Fiery liquid sloshed from the reservoir onto Akakios' toga. Flames engulfed him. Herodo, clutching his chest, stepped backwards from the human torch. There was no sound save the distant shouts of men and the burning of Akakios' clothing. The librarian fell forward into the papyrus bin. The bin spilled burning scrolls. Herodo watched in fascination as they rolled under tables and benches. The dry cedar wood caught immediately. Smoke filled Scribe Hall. Herodo picked up the scroll from the table and threw it at Akakios' twitching, burning body. The papyrus flared to life in an instant. The fire had already caught the railings. Orange and crimson licked from the floor to the ceiling of the staircase. Herodo turned and shuffled toward the storeroom, each step a chuffing agony in his lungs. The smoke thickened. His vision faded in and out as he made his way to the hallway. The torches and braziers were out. Once he turned the corner and into the hallway's darkness, the air was clear of smoke, but he continued coughing. The pain in his chest was agony. The darkness was complete. Herodo wheezed. He put his right hand on the wall to guide himself. His dangling left hand burned with pain. There was a crash from Scribe Hall. Herodo loosed a tear. All the scrolls, all the writings, everything, gone. He entered the vast storeroom and stumbled to his left until his elbow touched shelving. His sandals crunched on something. Herodo paused. He squatted to his knees and pawed the floor. His finger touched a familiar surface. Akakios, bastard, he whispered. The man had destroyed the tablets. He walked down to the end of the shelves where the last of Traiani's tablets had been kept, but knew what he would find. Akakios had destroyed them all. His feet were crumbling thousands of years of history into sand. Light flickered from the hallway. The fire finally made its way from Scribe Hall. In moments, it would be in the storeroom. Herodot raised himself and leaned back against the shelves. Death was coming for him. Somehow, it didn't seem to matter. Is this how Aeson felt when he faced the Lapis man's dagger? The last keeper bowing to inevitability? I am now the last keeper, Traiani had written. But Traiani was gone. Herodot sucked in a breath. I am the last keeper, he whispered above the crackling of the approaching flames. The legend must survive. There was no way out of the storeroom, no other exit. Rashim, Aeson, Traiani, all would be lost in the fire. There would be nothing left unless... Herodot looked toward the center of the room. In the wan glow of the advancing fire, he saw the rectangular grate. He slowly dropped to his knees, screaming from the pain in his chest. A bubble of blood rose to his lips and popped. The light from the fire was growing, and smoke had begun to fill the storeroom. His right hand scrabbled and found the grate's edge. His calloused, strong fingers pried at the iron. The grate moved. Fresh pain rose up from his right hand. The metal had cut him, but he continued to pull. The grate moved another inch. Another. He pulled as hard as he could, and it slid across the stone floor. He stared down into gaping darkness. Herodot sat back on his ass and turned himself with his right hand. Back to the hole, he held out his legs and slowly lowered himself. His feet touched nothing but air. Gritting his teeth, he stretched out his right hand and pushed. He sank lower. Gravity finally took him, and he fell into the hole. The world was suffocating him. He was choking on smoke, and the heat was unbearable. Where am I? Ahead of him was impenetrable darkness. I fell asleep? Pain racked his chest with another coughing fit. The walls were barely large enough for his body. Can't move! Can't move! He squirmed and tried to make space, but it was futile. He couldn't turn around. There was nowhere to go but forward. Using his right arm and legs, he inched his way forward. The voices of Egyptian children chattered in his mind. Akakios' grinning face, eyes glittering with madness, floated before him and then morphed into Archelon's wild-eyed, pain-choked visage. Words written in blood appeared in the darkness, flashing in rapid succession. Last keeper, I am the last keeper, he chanted. The pain in his chest and hand drew tears. Each breath was a lightning bolt of raw nerves. He shuffled forward, crying. From behind, he heard the sound of wooden beams collapsing, the crash of stone on stone as pillars gave way. The library was being eaten by flame. Last keeper, he wheezed as he kept moving. A young man's brown face, the mark of the third eye emblazoned on his forehead, flashed in his mind. The boy held a charred skull in his hands, tears running down his grimy cheeks. Another man crouched behind a savaged woman's body. Concealed blood covered her back. He was screaming at the sky, one hand bleeding from the sigil of an eye carved into his flesh. Rashim, Aeson. The pain in his chest and his aching left hand were forgotten. Darkness had faded. All he could see was the sigil of the third eye carved in blue. Herodot's face lit in a smile. The floor disappeared beneath him. He fell through the crumbling stone tunnel and into darkness. Herodot landed in a heap. His right ankle twisted as he hit the floor. A low-lit brazier cast wan light into the room. His head buzzed with pain. The scribe lifted his head from the stone floor and stared into the face of a bronze lion. He scrabbled forward. The smell of smoke lessened, but he heard shouts outside the barely lit room. With his right hand, he reached around the back of the statue's head. His fingers touched the warm leather binding. He pulled the book from its hiding place and tucked it to his chest. Herodo crawled toward the brazier by the door. An ember dropped through the grate and landed beside him. He barely noticed when his tunic started burning. He kept moving forward toward the door. His knees bled. His left arm dragged along the stone floor. "Help me!" Herodo screamed. No response, save the continued shouts outside the door. Herodo reached it. He banged on the heavy cedar with his right hand. Herodo finally felt his skin burning and rolled over. The effort made his chest scream in pain. Another bubble of blood burst on his lips. "For Rashim," he whispered. The world went dark. Herodo drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamed of white-robed Egyptian men hovering over him, chanting and plying him with strange liquids. In some dreams, the burned face of Cleopas stood above him, a sad smile on his face. In others, he only saw Akakios's burning, mad eyes. The room was cool and dim when he opened his eyes. His body was swathed in fine cotton. He raised his head and saw a figure slumped against the far wall. "Who are you?" he croaked. The figure shifted in the chair. Herodo drew a sharp breath, and his lungs burned. "My boy?" a sleepy voice asked. "Are you awake?" Herodo sighed. The voice was familiar, if a bit more husky than he remembered. "Cleopas?" The figure rose from the chair and walked toward the bed. The old man's visage had been transformed. Scarred, shiny skin covered half his face, and his hairline had completely disappeared on the left side. The old man had been burned badly. "Yes, Herodo." "Sir, You are the luckiest man alive." Herodo struggled to speak. "How so?" Cleopas chuckled. "Because Ptolemy's royal guards plucked you from the fire's embrace. The rest of us were outside fighting the fire." The old librarian spat. "No thanks to Caesar, I might add." "Guard?" "Yes, Varsish himself carried you out of the treasure room. He said you looked half dead." Herodo said nothing. "How in Hades did you get in there?" "Tunnel. Went down the grate in the storeroom." "Ah," Cleopas wheezed. "So you fell into Alexander's artifacts?" Herodo nodded. "Lucky. What were you doing there? I thought I made it clear you were to stay in the dormitory." Herodo took a breath. "I wanted to look at my scrolls." Cleopas nodded. He licked his lips. "I find it very interesting you didn't appear with any." Herodo said nothing. "And yet Varsish pulled you from the treasure room clutching a book." "The book?" Herodo thought. "What book?" Cleopas smiled. "The book, Herodo. The one you found earlier that day." "I don't..." Cleopas waved his hand. "Don't lie to me, boy. I know what you found. What you think you found." Cleopas pulled something from his toga. "You found Nerital's famous tome." The old man stood and placed the leather book on Herodo's chest. He clutched it. His left hand ached. Wooden sticks were bandaged against his fingers. "Is it so important?" the old man asked. Herodo said nothing. Cleopas nodded. "You know, the library is no more." "What?" "It has been destroyed, part and parcel. All that remains is, laughably enough, the dormitory and dining hall. Even Alexander's treasure room has been destroyed." "Oh, Yahweh!" "Ptolemy's men could not put out the fire, nor could Caesar's." Cleopas cleared his throat. "We have dozens of librarians missing, your patron among them." Herodo said nothing. Cleopas moved forward until he stood at the foot of the bed.
You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?
I don't.
Of course you don't, Cleopas said. Of course you don't. Your friend Isaac is gone too.
Isaac?
Yes, I'm afraid I misjudged him. He stayed in the dormitory through the choking smoke, refused to leave until he found you.
Herodos sobbed. Stupid, stupid bastard. Cleopas said nothing. I
want to ask you a question, boy, and I want you to answer me, truthfully.
Herodo blinked away tears and nodded. The old man looked on the verge of tears himself.
Did you succeed? Did you find what you were looking for?
Yes, Herodo said. I did. Cleopas nodded.
Then the gods have blessed you.
The old man tapped a leather book with a gnarled finger.
Ptolemy will lose this war, my boy, and I know not what will happen in the coming years. The library is gone.
I'm so sorry, Herodo whispered. The old man waved his hand.
We will rebuild it, my son. We will. But I have another question to ask you.
Ask.
Do you remember the words, all that you have read, all that you have translated?
Yes. Cleopas tugged at his misshapen beard.
Then maybe it was worth it all.
The two said nothing for a moment.
I read the book,
Cleopas whispered. Herodo looked away.
This is the book from Philos's story.
He nodded.
Sanskrit was never my favorite language, but I know enough to get by,
The old man smiled.
Garaaga.
Garaaga, Herodo whispered in return. Do you believe?
Do you?
Cleopas countered. Herodo didn't reply. The old man nodded.
They tell me my wounds will not heal, that I'm going to die soon.
Cleopas scratched at his arm.
But I imagine as long as you live, I shall live too.
Yes, Herodo said.
That memory of yours will serve us well.
Yes.
I wonder, where will you go next?
Herodo shrugged. Archelon said I should leave the library. Find Gujaratine.
Gujaratine, Cleopas mused. Do you know where it is?
I know where it should be.
The old man's maps were burned.
Yes, Herodo whispered, and so was his body. Cleopas raised a brow.
And how do you know that?
Herodo said nothing. The old man sighed.
Do you remember when you first came to the library? You were Akakios' shadow.
Cleopas tugged at what remained of his beard.
Whenever he was at lecture, you were there. Whenever he was in scribe hall, you had a scroll in your hands.
Yes.
Wasn't all that long ago, was it?
No, sir. A smile broke across Cleopas' face.
Yet you are the finest scribe the library has ever had. The words are in your blood.
He stared down at his ruined left hand. The fingers had begun to ache. They will never work again, will they?
No, not likely, but your other hand is the writing hand, the important hand.
Cleopas leaned in.
Just make sure you protect it.
Neither spoke for a moment. From outside the room, Herodo heard the sounds of the market, of people going about their routines. The war has left the city?
Yes, Caesar burned his ships to frustrate Ptolemy's signalers. His legion launched an offensive and drove the confused army from the city. The fight is ongoing, but no longer with us.
What will you do now? Cleopas smiled.
This is my home. We will rebuild. I'll see to it. It'll be my legacy.
He looked down at his bandaged hand. The white cloth was stained with yellow and red.
I'll not be able to write anymore. I shall find someone to do that for me as well.
Sir?
Yes?
I will need money.
No, you won't, Cleopas said. You're Akakios' only heir, and since he is presumed dead...
His eyes were tearing up. He left it all to me.
Well, not all, of course. Quite a bit of it was left to the library for the scribes.
Herodotus shook his head. The man was a monster, sir.
Perhaps, but even monsters can do good deeds.
The room was quiet. Herodotus flexed the fingers on his left hand and winced. It will take me weeks to reach Gujaratine.
Yes, it will. May I suggest you plan that excursion when you are stronger?
Herodotus laughed. I will consider it, sir.
You will always have a place here in Alexandria, my friend. Always.
The old man offered his hand. Herodotus shook it with his right.
Good luck, young man,
Cleopas said.
Wherever your travels take you.
What of the book? Cleopas shrugged.
What of it? Varsish died shortly after the fire. No one else knows you have it, or that it even exists. Do with it what you like. Besides,
the old man grinned,
I imagine it will be safest with you.
Herodotus drowsed. It had been 3 wakings since Cleopas had come to see him. On the 4th waking, he struggled out of bed, donned a tunic, and stumbled out into the streets of Alexandria. Caesar had already won the war, although the battles were still being fought. It had been a week since the library caught fire. He limped to the site and stared. The tall facades were gone. The fire had burned through the wooden buttresses, weakening the stone pillars until they collapsed. The roof had fallen into the top floor, which then fell into the next floor down. With each addition of weight, the pillars had crumbled. Huge shards of stone were visible in the hole where the library once stood. The dormitory on the end was blackened, but whole. Herodotus wiped a tear from his cheek. Isaac, Archelon, the maps, the friezes, statues, murals, paintings, and the scrolls were all gone. Thousands of years of history lost in a single night, and he was responsible. The image of Akakio's burning body falling into the papyrus bin, burning scrolls flooding across the floor, crept into his mind. His patron, his library, all gone. He limped away from the lip of the burned hulk. A group of bored centurions guarded the dormitory. They barely spared him a glance. He walked past them and toward the end of the remaining building. He slid his good hand into his tunic and brushed against the book. Its leather surface was warm in the cool air. It had to be protected until he found a way to destroy it. Cleopas suggested he stave off his trip to Gujaratine until he was rested. Herodotus smiled. He turned his back on what remained of his home and headed toward the hovel Cleopas had rented for him. He already found a group of Jews headed for Jerusalem and paid for a passage with them. Akakio's fortune would pay his way, perhaps even allow him to find a home there. But more importantly, he would find a place to hide the book.